Smoke curled like fingers through the cracks of the Colosseum's great stone archways, curling into sky where 3 suns bled pale orange light over the jagged peaks of the outlier mountains. Inside the massive arena, the noise of thousands of throats clashing in anticipation pulsed like a war drum. Beneath their feet, embedded in the sand, were bones of champions long dead, silent reminders of what failure meant here. Azija knelt in the dust, breath shallow, arms hanging at her sides. Her once glorious armor was in shards, ceremonial beads torn from her braids, leaving strands of her midnight blue hair hanging limp and tangled. Blood, dark and iridescent, trickled down the side of her face, dripping from her jaw like ink. She neither wiped away nor raised her eyes to meet the crowd. The battle had already been decided. Across from her, the champion stood, towering, impenetrable, draped in obsidian warplate etched with ancient glyphs that pulsed with emberlight, as though fire coursed beneath the armor itself. His sword was as broad as Azija's body, the edge glowing faintly, charged with some cruel energy. He hadn't even broken a sweat. Not one sound had escaped him during their fight. Not a grunt, not a word. He was more machine than man, more myth than warrior, and he had bested her. The memory of her final mistake replayed again. A feint to the left, a downward sweep. She had seen it coming. She'd counted 100 such moves before, but her legs had betrayed her. Days of captivity, weeks without rest or nourishment, and the sickness festering in her gut had dulled her reflexes. One beat too slow, one breath too late. He hadn't killed her then, not immediately. Instead, he had struck the blade across her back and let her drop to her knees, as though he wanted the crowd to savor the death of a legend. She was the last daughter of the Sahari, the warrior tribe that once defied the Imperial Legion for 7 years in the Obsidian Wars. Her name was spoken in the same breath as rebellion. Her very presence in the arena was a message. Even the mighty kneel. So she did, bruised, broken, silent. Above, in the judge's box, the Lord Enforcer leaned forward, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. His gaudy cloak trailed behind him like molten silk, and from his finger hung the execution charm, a thin medallion attached to a loop of bone. A flick of it would give the champion permission to strike. No trial, no mercy, just spectacle. The crowd roared his name, demanding blood. Azija closed her eyes. If this was to be her end, she would not meet it begging. She allowed her thoughts to slip, not to the pain, but to a memory, a quiet one, a field of whispering grass on her homeworld, wind brushing her cheeks, laughter, her brother's, before he was taken, a breeze that smelled of wild spice. It steadied her, and yet, despite herself, she still hated this ending. Among the crowd, far above, a lone figure stood unmoving. While the masses leaned forward, shrieking for blood, this one remained still as stone. His cloak was a patchwork of faded greens and browns, wrapped tightly to conceal the weapon strapped his back, a bow carved from bonewood, the last of its kind. His name was Kale. To most, he was just another drifter, another face in the rabble, but he remembered her, not from the broadcasted matches or the war propaganda. No, Kale remembered the night she spared him. Years ago, during a raid on a weapons convoy, she had found him, just a farm boy holding a stolen blade too big for his hands. He had expected death. Instead, she had turned away. That moment had scorched itself into Kale's memory. And now, watching her kneel beneath the boot of a tyrant's war machine, he felt something in him snap like a dry twig. The plan had always been insane. Sneak into the capital, get close to the arena, take one shot. But now, with the execution charm swaying from the enforcer's hand, and the champion raising that cursed sword overhead, Kale knew there was no choice. His fingers moved with instinct, smooth and silent. He unwrapped the bow, knocked the arrow, drew it back. It wasn't a standard arrow. Crafted in the mines of Delith Prime, the shaft was lined with a thin layer of phase-tuned crystal, and the head, serrated, barbed, and humming with silent voltage, had been forged by a friend who died for the rebellion's cause. It was designed not to pierce, but to obliterate. He exhaled. Below, Azija's eyes opened, as though she sensed something change in the air. The champion's blade came down, swift as judgment, and the arrow screamed past her ear. Azija heard it before she saw it. A hiss like an angry wasp, then a flash of blue that grazed the side of her face. She flinched on instinct, unsure if it had struck her. Then she saw the champion's body jolt. The blade, once aimed at her neck, halted mid-swing. His chest had exploded open, lightning cracking through his armor as the arrow buried itself deep into the core of his suit. Smoke and blood spewed from the wound, his grip loosening. His sword clattered to the ground, sizzling against the sand. He dropped to his knees, then forward, unmoving. The arena fell silent. Azija turned, still on her knees, and looked behind her into the crowd. But whoever had fired was already gone, vanished into the chaos above, as the crowd gasped, screamed, and surged into motion. Guards poured in from every direction. She didn't move. Not yet. Not until she understood. The impossible had happened. Her death had been stolen from the jaws of inevitability. Her shame, her failure, interrupted by a single, deliberate act. Azija placed a hand to her chest, felt the beat of her heart growing stronger. Around her, the sand shifted as soldiers ran toward the fallen champion, shouting, confused. The enforcer above was screaming at his aides, his face twisted in disbelief. The world had changed in a single breath. She wasn't dead. The champion was. Someone had just declared war. The crowd's silence shattered like glass underfoot. Screams burst from every tier of the arena. Some gasped in awe, others howled in confusion. Most simply ran, clawing over one another in a frenzied rush to escape what none of them could quite comprehend. The champion, the unbeaten behemoth of the Emperor's arena, lay face first in the blood-soaked sand, his charred armor leaking smoke, his sword inert beside him like a relic stripped of its myth. Azija rose to her feet slowly, unsteady but alive. Her fingers trembled at her sides. Her chest heaved with a strange rhythm of disbelief. She stared down at her would-be executioner, half expecting him to rise again, to prove himself immortal after all. But the wound was real. The arrowhead, barely visible, was still lodged between the jagged splits in his breastplate, pulsing with residual energy. The strike had been impossible, suicidal, perfect. Her gaze lifted. Far above, the enforcer had not moved. His mouth hung open as if the breath had been knocked from his lungs. The execution charm dangled uselessly from his hand. Around him, his officials barked into comm devices, calling for lockdowns, sweepers, retaliation orders. The machine of order groaned into motion, but too slowly. Azija's survival was a fracture in the narrative. The audience had come for a public death. What they got instead was a rebellion's first thunderclap. Across the tiered seats of the Colosseum, Kale moved with grim purpose. He'd already stowed the bow, now wrapped tightly across his back. The guards hadn't spotted him. Yet, in the panic, he was just another fleeing civilian. But his mind raced. He hadn't planned what would happen after the shot. There had been no certainty he'd survive this far. But now the plan had evolved. Escape was not just necessary. It was urgent, and he wasn't leaving without her. Below, Azija had begun to move. She crouched beside the champion's corpse, searching the smoking wreckage of his armor. Her hands found a small control disc lodged in the neck socket. A comm relay, perhaps, or security override. She snapped it free without knowing why, tucked it into her belt. Instinct, nothing more. Then came the shouting. A cluster of armored soldiers surged through one of the arena gates, shouting her name, weapons drawn. Not challengers, executioners. She didn't run. Not yet. Instead, she retrieved the fallen blade. It took both hands to lift it, and it hummed with latent energy, power that responded to touch, maybe even to will. She turned in her grasp and stepped over the champion's body, ready to meet them. Kale's voice cracked over the Colosseum's echoing chaos. Azija. She twisted toward the sound. He stood halfway down a stone staircase, just above the gladiator's entrance tunnel, waving her toward him. Their eyes met across the swirling bedlam. Recognition sparked. For a moment, she hesitated. Who was this human? Where had he come from? But something in his stance, his voice, no, Deeper than that, something in his aura told her the answer she didn't yet have words for. He ran. She followed. The guard shouted. Plasma fire hissed past their heads. The crowd became a wave of flesh and noise that threatened to crush them both. Cale ducked under a rail, spun through a group of fleeing merchants, and yanked open a maintenance hatch barely visible beneath a half-collapsed statue. He glanced back. Azija slid in beside him, the stolen blade in her grip. The hatch slammed shut. Silence returned, almost sacred. They descended a spiraling metal ladder into the dark bowels beneath the arena. Pipes hissed around them, dripping steam and slime. The walls were etched with graffiti, some ancient resistance slogans, others crude jokes. Cale led with urgency, counting turns, passing old smuggler symbols painted in red chalk. He didn't speak until they reached a cross-section of tunnels, where he stopped to let her catch up. She looked at him fully now, not as a savior, but as a man, worn leather armor, sharp eyes, dirt-streaked cheeks. He wasn't older than 30, but the weight of survival had left calluses on his face and a heaviness in his shoulders. "You," she said, voice still hoarse. "Why?" Cale met her gaze without flinching. "You spared me once. Years ago. Transport raid in the wastes. I spared a lot of people. Not like that. You could have killed me. No one would have blinked. But you didn't. You saw me. I never forgot." Azija tilted her head slightly, as if weighing the truth in his voice. "You risked your life. For a memory." He gave a dry smile. Seemed like a good trade. She considered this, then nodded. "I owe you." "No, you don't. But if you want to repay me, stay alive. We're not done yet." She looked down at the blade she carried, then back the way they came. "They'll come for us. They already are." Cale moved quickly again, signaling her to follow. "We got a 30-minute lead before lockdown spreads to the outer levels. After that, it's air drones and snatch teams. Then we move." They pressed forward through the underworks, deeper into the city's neglected arteries. The further they went, the more signs of life appeared. Makeshift shrines, burnt-out lanterns, discarded ration packs. This was where the exiled survived, the forgotten, the invisible. The tunnels whispered with their absence. As they ran, Azija's mind spun. This human, Cale, he had not only saved her life, but altered its course. Her death had been inevitable, even poetic. But this was wild, untethered. Hope born from chaos. A dangerous thing. "You part of a cell?" she asked over her shoulder. "Used to be," he said. "What's left of them is scattered. The champion's death will change that. We just gave the underground a rallying cry." Azija didn't respond immediately. She was listening, not to him, but to something deeper. The thrum in the floor. The distant hiss of moving air. The weight in her chest that had nothing to do with pain. They reached an iron door scabbed with rust. Cale tapped a sequence on the side panel. Nothing happened. "Damn," he hissed. Power rerouted. Without hesitation, Azija stepped forward and plunged the blade into the panel. Sparks danced. Circuits groaned. Then, click, the door slid open. Cale raised his eyebrows. "Remind me to keep you around." "I'll consider it." They stepped into a dim chamber filled with stacked crates, generator coils, and maps etched onto cracked display walls. It was an old command node long abandoned, but still usable. Cale dropped his pack. "We'll regroup here. Let the heat pass." Azija leaned against the wall, letting the sword rest beside her. Her limbs ached, but her mind remained sharp. "They'll call me a traitor," she said. "Say I cheated, that I faked my defeat." "Let them," Cale replied. "The people saw what really happened. You were supposed to die. You didn't. The symbol matters more than the details." She gave a soft snort. "Symbols get people killed." He shrugged. "So does silence." The lights flickered, then steadied. Cale walked to the corner and pulled back a scrap of canvas, revealing a narrow tunnel leading deeper underground. "What's down there?" she asked. "A path to the Undercity," he replied. "And maybe, if we're lucky, others like us." Azija stood up straight. The champion's blade still hummed faintly beside her, as if it had not yet finished its purpose. She picked it up. Then let's not waste time. Kale nodded, stepping aside to let her lead. Together, they vanished into the dark. Behind them, the city above roiled with panic. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to crouch. Wet stone pressing on either side, the ceiling hanging low enough that Kale's shoulders scraped it with every forward crawl. The light from his wrist torch pulsed faintly, casting warped shadows on the uneven walls. The sound of distant machinery throbbed behind the stone, fans, conduits, perhaps even the rhythm of the city's power core. But beneath it all was something older, a pulse, a presence, deep and buried. Azija moved ahead of him, quiet and sure-footed. Despite her injuries, she navigated the darkness like a predator that knew its terrain. Her grip on the champion's sword never loosened. The blade, still charged with residual energy, emitted a faint amber glow that traced the edges of her face. Scarred, determined, unreadable. Neither spoke for a long while. There were no words for what they were doing, no small talk that could mask the gravity of their path. She had cheated death. He had fired a shot that toppled a god. The Empire would not forget either of them. The tunnel ended abruptly in a rusted hatch. Kale gestured for silence, then pressed an ear against the iron. Beyond, he heard movement, voices, metal shifting, the familiar scrape of boots over gravel. Not soldiers. The cadence was wrong. Slower, tired, untrained. He knocked 4 times in rhythm, 2 short, 1 long, 1 short. A breath of silence passed. Then the hatch creaked open from the other side. 3 figures stood in the threshold, weapons raised. Makeshift rifles, scavenged armor, eyes full of suspicion. Their leader was a woman, her face drawn and gaunt, but sharp with recognition the moment she saw Kale. "Kale," she hissed. "What the hell?" "We need in, Marth," he said quickly. "We're burned." "She's with me." Marth's eyes flicked to Azija, and the air tightened. She didn't lower her weapon. "That's the champion killer." "No," Azija said evenly, stepping forward. The champion fell to a weapon. "I'm just what was left standing." Marth's lips twitched, not quite a smile. She stepped aside. "Fair enough. Get in. Quick." The hatch shut behind them. The room beyond was a converted substation, walls lined with old control panels, now repurposed into beds, ammo storage, and a central hub of maps and tracking devices. About 20 rebels crowded the space. Some wore stolen Imperial gear. Others bore crude tattoos marking their allegiance to forgotten causes. All stared at Azija. Whispers rippled. "That's her. Thought she was dead. She's the reason they're locking down the whole sector." Marth silenced them with a glance. "We'll talk later. For now, eyes up, everyone." Azija stood in the center of the room, conscious of every gaze, every breath drawn in her direction. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Reverence mixed with resentment. Some looked at her like a hero, others like a liability. But all of them, she realized, were looking for the same thing, direction. Kale peeled off his cloak and dropped it onto a crate. "We can't stay long. They'll sweep this level next." "They're already searching the junction corridors," Mara said. "That shot you fired? Half the district went on lockdown." "Then we move before they tighten the net," Kale replied. Azija moved closer to the map projected on the wall, a flickering schematic of the city's lower levels. Most of the paths were marked in red, sealed, watched, or too exposed, but a few corridors still flickered green. Routes forgotten, unsafe but possible. "Where do these lead?" she asked. Marth joined her, tapping a thin corridor near the edge of the map. Old freight channels. Pre-war. Collapsed in places, infested with dregs. But if you make it through, it spits you out near the Black Vein district. And beyond that, the Barrens. Free territory. What's left of it. Kale stepped in. "If we can reach the Barrens, we can regroup with the rest. The Red Echo, the Scorchborn, everyone who's still breathing." Azija studied the path. It was madness, but survival had never been sane. "I'll go," she said. Kale nodded. "We both will." Mareth frowned. "You won't make it alone. They'll be hunting you with heat scans, bio-readers, scent tracks. They'll throw everything." Azija lifted the champion's sword and rested it on her shoulder. Let them. No one argued further. The rebels provided what they could: rations, maps, thermal cloaks to mask their heat signatures. Azija accepted them without thanks, without apology. She wasn't here to beg for help. She was here because she had been spared, and now she had become something more than just a woman who didn't die. They left under cover of blackout, Kale, Azija, and a third rebel named RYX, a wiry scout with knowledge of the tunnels and a vendetta against the Empire sharp enough to cut steel. RYX barely spoke, but his presence was efficient, his movements precise. He walked like a man who'd already died once and knew better than to waste time. Hours passed in cramped silence. The tunnels grew colder the deeper they went. At one point, they passed a corridor choked with bones. Workers, perhaps, buried by a cave-in. Azija paused, bowed her head briefly, then moved on. No words for the dead, only action. At another point, they stopped to rest in the shell of an old tram car. Kale checked the map, while RYX dozed, his rifle resting across his chest. Azija sat apart, her back to the wall, sword propped beside her. Kale looked over. You ever think about what comes after all this? She didn't look at him. After what? The rebellion, the Empire falling, all of it. I used to, not anymore. Why? Because it softens you, she said, gives you something to lose. That's dangerous. Kale considered that. Maybe, but having something to lose also means you're fighting for more than revenge. Her eyes met his. I didn't say I was fighting for revenge. No, I'm fighting to make sure no one else ends up on their knees in the sand, waiting to die for someone else's amusement. That silenced him. Moments later, RYX jolted upright. Drones. For clicks back. Moving fast. They were on their feet instantly. Cloaks up. Weapons ready. They ran. The tunnel grew narrower again. Dust fell from the ceiling with every step, the air growing fouler. They passed flickering lights, old warnings written in half-erased paint. Melt zone. Turn back. Kale ignored them. Then the path split. RYX halted. Left is faster, but exposed. Azija didn't hesitate. Right, but we don't need fast, she said. We need alive. They veered right. The tunnel dipped sharply, then opened into a cavernous space filled with old machinery and dripping vents. It was quiet, too quiet. Kale's instincts screamed a moment before it happened. The ambush was swift, for figures dropped from the overhead catwalk. Mercenaries, not soldiers. Paid scavengers working for the Empire, lured by bounty and blood. One lunged at RYX with a blade. Another fired a plasma bolt that scorched Kale's arm. Azija exploded into motion. The champion's sword howled as it sliced the air, cleaving one mercenary cleanly in two. She pivoted, kicked another into a pile of rusted piping, and drove the hilt into his throat. Kale pulled his short blade and gutted the third. RYX shot the last in the chest point blank. When it ended, for bodies lay smoking in the dark. RYX bled from a cut across his scalp. Kale winced from his burned arm. Azija was breathing hard, eyes wide with fury, not at the ambush, but at how easily it could have gone another way. She crouched beside the nearest corpse. A pale blue dawn filtered through the cracked skylight above, cutting thin lines of light across the dust-hung air of the abandoned transit station. The place had been dead for years, long since claimed by decay and the whispers of exiles. But this morning, it held breath again. Azija stood atop a collapsed pillar, watching the path they'd taken to the ruins below. Her boots were caked in soot and dried blood. The once pristine robe she'd worn in the arena, now stripped down to a ragged sash and armor, plating scavenged from the mercenaries they killed. The sword rested against her back, secured by a loop of cord she'd fashioned from electrical wire. Though she still bore the weight of battle, she no longer walked like prey. Behind her, Kale finished binding the last of RYX's wounds. The scout had taken another hit, escaping the drone pass, shrapnel through the thigh, but he never once slowed down. Now, his breath hissed through clenched teeth as Kale tightened the wrap. "You'll walk," Kale muttered, "but not fast." RYX wiped sweat from his brow and gave a crooked grin. Don't need fast, just need quiet. Kale's eyes flicked toward Azija. She hasn't spoken since we stopped. She's listening, our wife replied. Can't you feel it? It's too still. That's silence before something breaks. Kale rose and stepped toward her. We're nearly there, he said softly. Another few clicks through the western breach, and we're out. Black Vein's rebel hub is close. Mars should have sent a signal by now. Azija didn't turn. And when we get there, we rebuild, Kale said. Spread word. Rally the old cells. Show them the champion is dead. That the Empire can bleed. Symbols, she muttered. Kale was quiet for a moment, then said, You're still thinking like a soldier. Always a war, always an enemy. But what if that's not all this is? What else would it be? Maybe it's the start of something new, not just resistance. Renewal. She turned to him then. Her eyes were tired but alive. You really believe that? He nodded. I believe people need more than survival. They need something to fight for. She considered him. Kale had changed since they met. Less like a shadow hiding in alleys. More like a man who had found a purpose too important to run from. The conversation was cut short by a sharp beep from Kale's comm device. He pulled out, scanning the encrypted signal. A location ping flickered across the screen. Coordinates in the Black Vein district. A message accompanied it. Shelter secured. You're expected. Do not approach directly. Watch for strikers. Kale grimaced. They're still hunting. Striker units are already near the edge of the Barrens. We'll have to loop west, come in through the scrap fields. Our YX cough a laugh. Great. Nothing like mine-laced junkyards to get the morning going. Azija dropped from the pillar, landing with a soft crunch. Let's move. They traveled under cover of debris, cutting through shattered tram lines and concrete husks overgrown with rust vine. The closer they got to the perimeter of the Black Vein, the more signs of life they found. Graffiti messages written in code, warning flares burned into walls. Tracks leading in both directions. But they also found signs of slaughter. A rebel safe house, its door blasted inward. The corpses left in the open. A child bootprint, half filled with ash. Blood trails that led nowhere. Azija knelt by one of the bodies. An older man, unarmed. Shot through the head at close range. No mercy, she muttered. They don't want prisoners anymore. Kale said. They want fear. They always did. When they reached the edge of the scrap fields, our YX stayed behind to cover their flank. He insisted he could still shoot straight. Kale didn't argue. There was no time. The scrap field stretched out in jagged heaps, metal torn and twisted by decades of neglect. Sun-bleached wreckage of old transports, construction rigs, and weapon carriers. Navigation was slow, each step requiring care. The Empire had long ago seeded it with proximity mines to deter rebel movement. One wrong footfall could end it all. Azija led. She didn't speak, but she moved with strange certainty, as though some internal compass guided her. Kale followed, trusting her instinct more than any map. Halfway through, they heard the drone, a sharp whir above the wind. Fast, sweeping. Kale ducked behind a torn engine mount, pulling Azija with him. The drone passed overhead, scanning, then paused. A red light blinked beneath its chassis. Kale reached for his bow, but Azija grabbed his wrist. No, she whispered. Too fast. Too far. They waited, breath held. The drone hovered, lingered, then veered away. Kale exhaled. That was close. She nodded, eyes still on the sky. Too close. They're tightening the ring. When they finally emerged from the far side of the scrap field, the Black Vein lay ahead, a stretch of collapsed towers stitched together by scaffolding, tarp bridges, and rusted platforms. The rebels had built their base into the bones of a ruined city block, hiding strength beneath wreckage. A coded pulse lit Kale's comm again. A checkpoint blinked into view, a small door carved into the base of a tower, marked with a rebel sigil, a phoenix in eclipse. He knocked twice, paused, then once. The door opened. Inside, the air was cool, filtered. A large chamber held weapons, gear, and a dozen rebels seated around a tactical table. Mara stood at its head. Her face lit up at the sight of them. You made it. Barely, Kale said. They're sweeping hard. She nodded. We've seen. Lost 2 more cells this morning. But your shot, it worked. Broadcasts are flying. People are listening. Azija stepped forward. Then speak louder. Mareth tilted her head. You're not what I expected. I'm not what I was, Azija replied. Neither is this war. Mareth looked at her for a long moment, then turned to the others. Prepare the feeds. Get the voice line ready. One of the rebels looked up. You mean her? Mareth nodded. Let the people see the warrior who stood against a champion and lived. Azija hesitated, then stepped toward the terminal. A camera embedded in a screen blinked on. She didn't ask what to say. She spoke. My name is Azija of the Sahari. I was meant to die in the arena, like so many before me, but I did not. I stand now because one man chose defiance over despair, because one act of courage shattered a myth. Her eyes narrowed, voice sharpening. They tell you the Empire is eternal, that its champions are invincible, that obedience is survival. But they lie. I saw the champion bleed. I watched him fall. And I stand now to tell you, so can the rest. Behind her, Kale watched the feed go live, watched her words echo into the world beyond, watched hope return to faces that had forgotten how to hold it. And somewhere, far above, in towers of glass and steel, those words would reach the ears of the Empire. It had begun, not with an army, but with a shot, a scream, a sword lifted from the sand.